This photo of two friends seemed innocent until historians noticed a dark secret hiding inside it. The National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. lived on donations. Almost every day, boxes arrived at the loading dock, packed with family photographs, letters, documents, and artifacts that people hoped would help preserve Black history. For 5 years, curator James Rivera had worked in the collections department. He had handled thousands of images, faded daguerreotypes of newly freed men trying to look proud in stiff collars, studio portraits of civil rights activists who had faced hatred and still stood tall, simple family snapshots, church picnics, front porches, cramped kitchens, moments of everyday Black life across generations. Most days it felt like quiet routine. Carefully open the box, log each item, store, label, preserve. But on a humid September morning, something different arrived. The box was medium-sized, plain, and ordinary at first glance. The shipping label said it had come from Richmond, Virginia. Inside the lid, taped neatly, was a letter from a lawyer handling an estate. The donor's name was Dorothy Hayes, age 97 at the time of her death. No children, no close family. Her house, the letter explained, had been full of carefully preserved papers and photographs, but almost nothing was labeled or explained. The lawyer had written, "We believe these materials may be of historical interest, especially relating to African American life after the Civil War. We hope the museum can determine their significance." James set the letter aside and lifted out a worn leather portfolio from the box. It looked old but well cared for, edges rubbed smooth by years of handling, the kind of thing someone treasured but never talked about. He placed it gently on the table, opened the clasp, and folded it open. Inside, wrapped in layers of thin, yellowed tissue paper, was a single-mounted studio photograph. The cardboard backing had darkened with age, but the image itself was still clear. At the bottom, in neat printed lettering, was the photographer's stamp. Anderson Sons Photography, Richmond, Virginia, 1889. James straightened unconsciously. 1889, just 24 years after the end of the Civil War. Deep in the era when the South was rebuilding its identity and tightening its grip through Jim Crow. He lifted the photograph closer. Two young men stood side by side. Both wore matching dark suits, crisp white collars, and patterned ties. The clothing was formal, tailored, and expensive. This was not a casual picture taken in someone's yard. This was a studio portrait, and studio portraits cost money. Behind them was a painted backdrop of a gentleman's library, shelves of books, a vase on a small table, a Bible resting beside it, the kind of background meant to suggest education, respectability, refinement. The man on the left was white, early 20s, his light hair neatly parted. A small handlebar mustache was just starting to grow in. His expression was serious but not harsh. There was a hint of warmth in his eyes. The man on the right was black, about the same age. He had a strong jaw, calm eyes, and the same dignified posture. His suit was just as fine. His shoes, barely visible at the bottom, were polished leather. At first glance, James felt something like hope. Two young men, one white, one black, standing as equals, in 1889 Virginia. That alone was extraordinary. But it was their pose that made him lean closer. The white man's hand rested on the black man's shoulder, not in a stiff, formal way, but almost protectively. The black man's hand reached across his own body to grip the white man's forearm. Their hands formed a closed circle between them. It looked like friendship, not employer and servant, not master and former slave. Something closer, something braver. James felt a familiar tingle at the back of his neck. the feeling he got when an object carried more than it seemed. He reached for his magnifying glass. Up close, the details began to shift. The white man's hand wasn't gently resting. It was tightening. The fingers dug slightly into the black man's shoulder, the knuckles a little pale. The black man's smile, which had looked natural from a distance, now seemed strained. His eyes weren't relaxed, and his free hand, hanging at his side, was curled into a fist. The picture still showed two friends. But now, underneath that, James saw fear. Oh. He flipped the photograph over. On the back, in faded brown ink, someone had written in a shaky hand, "Thomas and Marcus, the last photograph before the departure. May God forgive us for what we have done." September 14th, 1889. James read it once, then again, then a third time, slower. The last photograph before the departure. May God forgive us for what we have done. Not what we will do, not what we must do, what we have done. Whatever had happened, whatever needed forgiveness, was already in the past when this photograph was taken. James turned the picture back over and stared at their faces. Two names, Thomas and Marcus. Two hands locked together. One clenched fist. And a message that sounded like a confession. The photo of two friends was not simple at all. Something terrible was hiding behind this image. For the first time that morning, James knew. This wasn't just another donation. This was the beginning of an investigation. James couldn't shake the feeling that the photograph was hiding a story far darker than it appeared. He sat down at his desk, powered on his computer, and began where any investigation must begin, with the names. Thomas and Marcus. Common names, no last names, no family details, no clear starting point. But there was one clue. Anderson Sons Photography, Richmond, Virginia, 1889. James searched Richmond city directories from the late 1800s. He found that the studio existed from 1885 to 1893, known for serving wealthy white families. That made the interracial portrait even more unusual. Next, he looked at the expensive matching suits, the shoes, the backdrop of a refined library. Everything suggested money, planning, and a deliberate statement. Yet the tension in their eyes suggested the opposite: fear, urgency, danger. James zoomed in on the white man's grip again. Too tight. Possessive? Protective? Warning? Something wasn't right. He switched strategies. If the studio catered to wealthy families, then Thomas might belong to one of Richmond's old plantation families. He searched the 1880 census for a young white man named Thomas, aged around 13 then. Most entries were dead ends, but one made him pause. Thomas Whitmore, age 13, Henrico County, right outside Richmond. Father, William Whitmore, planter. And in the same household, Marcus, age 13, race, colored, no last name. James leaned back, heart pounding. Two boys, same age, same home. One the landowner's son, one a black servant with no recorded surname. It fit. But why, in 1889, were they dressed like equals? Why take a portrait together? Why that terrified inscription? He dug deeper. Property records showed the Whitmore family owned a large plantation called Oakwood. Slave schedules from 1860 listed 43 enslaved people. After the war, the family still employed many of the same people as servants. James needed help. He called his colleague, Dr. Patricia Okoye, a historian who specialized in post-Civil War Virginia. Within hours, she agreed to meet him at the Library of Virginia in Richmond the next morning. Before leaving work, James examined the photo one last time. The chain in the painted backdrop, hidden but intentional. the white-knuckled grip, Marcus's clenched fist, the inscription begging forgiveness. This wasn't just friendship. This was a warning, a message, a clue left behind by two young men who knew they were running out of time. Whatever happened to Thomas and Marcus after this photograph, James was now determined to find out. The next morning, James met Dr. Patricia Okoye at the Library of Virginia. They requested boxes of records from Henrico County, property deeds, court files, labor contracts, and newspapers from the 1880s. They divided the work. Patricia focused on the Whitmore family's land history. James focused on legal documents. Within an hour, Patricia called him over. "So, James, look at this." Spread across the table was an 1858 survey map of Oakwood Plantation, over 1,200 acres. She laid another page beside it, the 1870 census. There it was in black ink. Marcus Freeman, age 16, laborer. "Freeman," Patricia whispered. "He chose his own surname after emancipation." No, but the truth was harder. Marcus hadn't left Oakwood at all. He had remained working for the family that once owned him. Oh no. James kept digging and found the labor contracts filed after the Civil War. They were supposed to represent free employment, but Oakwood's contracts told a different story. Year after year, 1866, 1867, 1868, all the way to 1885, Marcus had signed contracts binding him to the Whitmores under crushing debt. Wages too low to ever repay the debt. Charges for food, clothing, and housing taken out of his pay. Punishments for leaving early. Sheriff-approved arrests for anyone who tried to escape. Patricia whispered the word neither of them wanted to say, but both recognized instantly. Peonage. The illegal system that kept black workers enslaved after slavery ended. James felt sick. It was slavery by another name. Then came the document that changed everything. Patricia found a thin court file dated September 10th, 1889, just 4 days before the photograph. It read, "William Whitmore versus Thomas Whitmore. Dispute regarding human chattel unlawfully retained. Human chattel in 1889. James's stomach dropped. Thomas, his own son, had filed a counterclaim the same day accusing his father of illegal peonage, fraudulent labor contracts, coercion, and abuse. Thomas was trying to free Marcus, Patricia said quietly. And his father tried to stop him, James replied. They looked to the date. September 10th, 1889. The photograph was taken at September 14th, 1889. That picture wasn't just friendship. It was a statement. And evidence. Oh, a final record before something dangerous happened. James searched the newspapers from October 1889 and froze. A quiet obituary. Thomas William Whitmore, 23, died suddenly in a hunting accident. October 2nd, 1889. Just 18 days after the photograph. Just weeks after accusing his father of illegal enslavement. A hunting accident in the study of the main house. Witnessed only by the father and the sheriff. Patricia looked at James with wide, horrified eyes. This isn't an accident, she said. This is a cover-up. And if Thomas was dead, what had happened to Marcus? After uncovering the truth about Thomas's death, James and Patricia knew one thing with certainty. If Thomas had been silenced, Marcus was in even greater danger. They shifted their focus entirely to Marcus. James searched census records from 1890 and 1900, but the 1890 census had mostly been destroyed in a fire, and the 1900 census showed no trace of a Marcus Freeman matching his age anywhere in Virginia. It was as if he had vanished. Either he was killed, Patricia said quietly, or he ran. James refused to believe Marcus died. Thomas had fought too hard to free him. Then, 3 days later, everything changed. James received a call from Dr. Raymond Cole, an expert with the Freedmen's Bureau Project. "I think I found him," Raymond said. He sent a scan page from the First Baptist Church of Philadelphia membership record. There, in neat handwriting, Marcus Freeman, age 24, admitted April 12, 1891, birthplace, Virginia, occupation, carpenter. James stared at the screen. Marcus had escaped. Not just escaped, he had gone north, far from Virginia, far from Oakwood, far from William Whitmore and the sheriff who helped him. Within minutes, James was searching Philadelphia directories, and there he was. 1892, carpenter living on South Street. 1895, owner of a small carpentry business. 1896, married to Sarah Johnson. 1900, father of 2 children running a successful workshop. But the most shocking discovery came next. James found a newspaper article from the Philadelphia Tribune dated October 1899. Local businessman shares story of escape from illegal peonage. The article mentioned that Marcus had survived years of forced labor in Virginia and escaped with the help of someone who paid the ultimate price, Thomas. James dug deeper and found Marcus again in 1902, giving sworn testimony before a congressional investigation into peonage. In his testimony, Marcus described being born enslaved at Oakwood, signing fake contracts year after year, attempting escape and being dragged back in chains. Thomas discovering the truth after returning from university. Thomas secretly copying contracts and planning a legal case. Thomas warning him of danger. Then came the part that made James sit motionless. Marcus testified that on October 2nd, 1889, he heard a gunshot from the main house. When he rushed inside, he found Thomas dying. Thomas looked at him and whispered, "Run, Marcus, papers, desk, run." Sheriff Crawford and William Whitmore burst in moments later and immediately accused Marcus of murder. He fled that night under cover of darkness, carrying only the court order freeing him, signed the same day, copies of the fraudulent contracts, Thomas's affidavit detailing the crimes, and the photograph they had taken as proof of their bond. He walked for weeks, slept in forests, hid from patrols, and finally reached Philadelphia, where he rebuilt his life. Marcus ended his testimony with a line James would never forget. "Thomas Whitmore died because he believed I deserved to be free." James closed his laptop slowly. The story was no longer a mystery. It was a tragedy and a miracle. Marcus survived. Thomas didn't. And that photograph was their last stand together. The only question left was, after learning Marcus's full story, James knew something important. Knew the evidence Thomas died for must still exist somewhere. Marcus had carried the papers during his escape. He had used them to win his freedom, to testify, to build his life. So where were they now? The answer arrived unexpectedly. James remembered. The donor of the photograph, Dorothy Hayes, age 97, had lived in Richmond. Her house had been full of old papers. Dorothy Hayes. That name suddenly connected. Marcus had a granddaughter named Dorothy Freeman Hayes. James froze. The donor was Marcus Freeman's granddaughter. If she donated one item, there might be more. He immediately called her estate lawyer, Jennifer Park, the woman who had sent the donation. "Miss Park," James said, trying to keep his voice calm, "I believe the materials you found may hold major historical evidence. Were there other boxes you didn't send? There was a short silence. Yes, she finally said. There are 5 more boxes of personal papers. We didn't know if they were important. James was on the next flight to Richmond. Inside the estate office, Jennifer led him to a storage room. 5 cardboard boxes set neatly on a table, each labeled Hayes Personal Papers. James put on gloves. His hands shook. He opened the first box. Inside were letters, bundles tied with ribbon. One caught his eye immediately. A letter from Marcus to his son, dated 1929. My son, you carry the name of the bravest man I ever knew. Thomas Whitmore died for my freedom. I write this so the truth is never lost. James photographed every page. He opened the second box. Business ledgers, receipts, contracts from Marcus's carpentry shop in Philadelphia. Then came the third box. Wrapped in old oilcloth were legal documents. James unfolded the first one, his breath caught. A court order from October 2nd, 1889, signed by a Richmond judge, officially freeing Marcus Freeman and awarding him $500 in back wages. The very papers Thomas had risked everything to obtain. The second document, Thomas Whitmore's full affidavit, written in his own hand, accusing his father of peonage and providing written evidence. At the bottom, or if something happens to me, use this to prove the truth. Thomas Whitmore, September 14th, 1889. The day they took the photograph. The third document was a second print of the same photograph, with a handwritten note from Thomas to Marcus. We stand as equals here. If I do not survive, let this image speak. James felt tears in his eyes. The fourth box. Inside were newspaper clippings Marcus had saved throughout his life. One headline chilled James. William Whitmore, prominent planner, dies peacefully at 78. No mention of murder. No mention of peonage. No mention of Thomas. The truth had been buried, except by Marcus. The fifth box. This one held personal treasures. Marcus's worn Bible, a pocket watch, and a small leather journal. James opened it gently. It was Marcus's diary, entries from 1890 through 1900. The first page read, I am free. Thomas died to make it so. I will not waste the gift he gave me. Other entries spoke of his first winter in Philadelphia, building his carpentry shop, teaching his children to read, memories of Thomas's kindness, visits to the photograph on its anniversary each year. One entry made James pause. I keep the papers always near me. One day, someone must know what Thomas did. Or that day had come. James stepped back from the table, overwhelmed. After 135 years, the truth hadn't been destroyed. It hadn't been lost. It had been protected, quietly, carefully, lovingly, across generations, because Marcus had honored Thomas. His children had honored Marcus. And finally, a granddaughter who never knew the full story preserved everything without even realizing it. But James closed the last box. He whispered to himself. With the documents secured and digitized, James had one mission left. Find the living descendants, Marcus Freeman's family and Thomas Whitmore's family. They deserved to know the truth hidden for 135 years. Finding Marcus Freeman's great-great-granddaughter, Patricia helped trace Marcus's family line through census records and marriage certificates. Marcus's son, Thomas Freeman, had 3 children. One grandson, Marcus Freeman II, had grown into a civil rights lawyer in the 1960s. He had two daughters. One of them, Dr. Alicia Freeman, was still alive, a retired professor living in Oakland, California. James dialed her number with trembling hands. Dr. Freeman, my name is James Rivera. I'm a curator at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I've been researching your family's history. In silence. Then a soft inhale. My great-grandfather, Marcus Freeman, she whispered. Yes, James said. And I found documents that reveal exactly how he won his freedom. They include a photograph, legal papers, his diary, and an affidavit from the man who helped him escape. Alicia's voice cracked. Thomas Whitmore, she said. My grandfather told me that name like it was sacred, but we never had proof. Dr. Freeman, James said gently, I have the proof. 3 days later, Alicia flew to Washington. When she saw the photograph, her great-great-grandfather standing next to the white man who died for him, she covered her mouth with both hands and wept. She read his diary, touched the documents Thomas had prepared, and whispered, Oh, he carried this pain his whole life, and he still found a way to forgive. Finding the Whitmore descendants, finding the Whitmore family was easier. The plantation owner, William Whitmore, had remarried. His second family survived and prospered. James found a direct descendant, Robert Whitmore, a retired attorney living in Alexandria, Virginia. James wasn't sure how he would react. Some families fought hard against the truth of their past. Others denied it entirely. And James presented the documents quietly. Thomas's affidavit, the fraudulent contracts, newspaper articles, Marcus's testimony, the photograph, the court order that freed Marcus, the death records and hunting accident cover story. Robert read everything slowly. When he reached Thomas's final note to Marcus, he stopped speaking altogether. Minutes passed. Finally, he said, My family always told us Thomas died in a hunting accident, but this explains everything. His voice shook, not with anger, but with grief. My ancestor, William, committed a crime, and Thomas, he died trying to stop it. He looked up at James with red eyes. People should know the truth, the good and the evil. I want to help tell this story. James exhaled with relief. Two families, two lines of descendants, both willing to share the truth, one honoring the sacrifice, one acknowledging the guilt. Plans for an exhibition. Together, James, Patricia, Alicia, and Robert began discussing the possibility of a museum exhibition. They agreed it must be honest, not softened, complete, not partial, balanced, showing both Marcus and Thomas, educational, exposing peonage, emotional, centered on the photograph. Alicia placed her hand on the photo case and said softly, We owe them this. Marcus carried the truth for decades. Now it's our turn. Robert nodded beside her. Thomas deserves to be remembered as the man he chose to be, not the one history erased. And in that moment, two families, one descended from the enslaved, one from the enslaver, stood side by side, healing something their ancestors never got the chance to heal. 6 months later, the National Museum of African American History and Culture opened its newest exhibition. The photograph that testified, a story of friendship, courage, and peonage. From the very first day, the line stretched around the building. People came because of the title. They stayed because of the truth. The photograph at the center. The main gallery was dim except for a single spotlight. There, behind glass, stood the original 1889 portrait of Thomas and Marcus. The white-knuckled grip, the clenched fist, the fear in their eyes, the chain hidden in the painted backdrop, the handwritten note on the back. Visitors leaned forward, studying every detail. Some cried silently, others whispered to their children, "Look closely, really look." A text panel beside the photo displayed Thomas's own words, "We stand as equals here." It was the sentence he wrote to Marcus just days before he was killed. Thomas's courage on display. One whole section was dedicated to Thomas Whitmore. His affidavit accusing his father of illegal enslavement, copies of the fraudulent contracts, his statement, "If something happens to me, use this evidence to prove the truth." The court order he obtained freeing Marcus, newspaper clippings of his fake hunting accident. Visitors stood in silence, reading each line. Thomas wasn't portrayed as a flawless hero, but as a young man raised in a slave-owning family who chose justice over blood, comfort, and safety, the very choice that cost him his life. Marcus's journey to freedom. Another section followed Marcus Freeman's escape. The map of his long walk from Richmond to Philadelphia, pages from his diary, his 1902 congressional testimony, photographs of his carpentry business, his speeches against peonage, his family tree leading to Dr. Elisha Freeman. Marcus's diary entry played on a screen. "I am free. Thomas died to make it so." Visitors often stood in front of this display the longest. The Descendants Speak, a video played in a quiet corner of the gallery. It showed Elisha Freeman describing the moment she learned the full truth. "My great-great-grandfather survived, but he carried the trauma forever. This exhibition lets him finally rest." Then came Robert Whitmore, the descendant of the enslaver. He didn't hide from the truth. "My ancestor killed his own son to protect a crime, but Thomas chose the right side of history. My family will never deny that again." People in the room often cried hearing the two families speak together, a reconciliation 135 years in the making. The public reaction. Social media exploded. News channels covered it non-stop. Teachers requested traveling versions for their classrooms. Historians called it one of the most important peonage exhibitions ever created. People left messages on a digital wall near the exit. "I had no idea peonage existed. Thomas and Marcus deserved to be remembered. This changed how I see history. We must face our past honestly. Their friendship gives me hope." James watched from the corner of the room, overwhelmed. All the long nights, all the research, all the searching, it had been worth it. Elisha stood beside him and whispered, "Marcus kept the truth alive for 40 years. You carried it the rest of the way." James shook his head. "No, Thomas and Marcus carried it. We just finally listened." Long after the exhibition opened, long after the crowds thinned and the excitement settled, the photograph of Thomas and Marcus remained at the center of the museum, glowing softly under its protective glass, still holding the weight of two young men's courage. James often visited the gallery in the quiet evenings when most visitors had gone. He stood in front of the photo the same way he did the first time he saw it, humbled, shaken, grateful. Yeah, because now he understood. This wasn't just a picture. It was evidence, a testimony, a promise. The ripple effect. Weeks passed, and the exhibition continued to inspire people across the country. Universities requested lectures about peonage. Churches held discussions on courage and moral choice. Descendants of other peonage survivors came forward with their own stories. Students wrote essays about friendship-defying racial terror. Parents brought their children to show them what real bravery looked like. Thomas and Marcus, two young men erased from their time, became symbols of solidarity in ours. The two families unite. One Saturday afternoon, the museum held a private event for the Freeman and Whitmore families. Alicia Freeman arrived first, carrying a photo of Marcus in his later years, proud, gentle, wise. Robert Whitmore arrived with a framed copy of Thomas's university portrait. The two families stood together in front of the 1889 photograph, quiet at first, then comforted by each other's presence. Alicia touched the glass gently. Marcus survived because someone saw his humanity. Robert nodded, tears in his eyes. And Thomas died because he refused to ignore it. For a moment, past and present felt connected. Two families joined by tragedy, truth, and a friendship stronger than the world around it. James understands the real meaning. As the years passed, James realized something important. The true power of the story wasn't just in exposing a crime, it was in revealing a choice. In 1889, the world tried to force Thomas and Marcus into roles: master and servant, owner and property, white and black, but they refused. They chose to stand as equals, even when it cost everything. That was the legacy. Not just the horror of peonage, not just the injustice of Thomas's death, not just the miracle of Marcus's escape, but the courage it took for two young men to see each other's humanity in a world built to destroy it. The photograph's final meaning. One evening, as James prepared to leave the gallery, he turned for a last look at the photograph. The two young men stared back. Thomas gripping Marcus's shoulder, jaw tight with fear but filled with resolve. Marcus holding Thomas's arm, eyes heavy with worry yet burning with dignity. A chain hidden in the backdrop, a quiet threat. A warning written on the back, a plea for forgiveness. And their hands, locked together, refusing to let go. James whispered, "You didn't die in silence. We heard you." For 135 years, the truth waited in an old portfolio. Now it was alive, taught, honored, remembered. And the photograph that once seemed so simple had become something eternal, a reminder that history is not only what happened, but what people fought for, what they protected, and what they loved enough to risk everything.